Do they mix? Put about 100 people in a room saying that as part of a live studio audience, you'd have a 70s game show. TikTok thread, hashtag do they mix, pick the social media platform of your choice, although that one might end horribly and disgusting if you stop and think about the possibilities. But it's not going to end horribly and disgustingly today because it's the title of this episode of Off Topic. I am Matthew East and I'm glad you're here. We are going to ask this question in a huge spectrum of ways. We are going to cover food, we are going to cover drink, we're going to cover time. We're going to talk about things that are really, really amazing on their own and might mix together quite horribly. Or some things that are honestly quite awful on their own that when combined form something incredible. There's also some really good things that when mixed together create something even better, like the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup I'm about to eat. Then we're going to dig a little deeper. We'll get into some societal questions. I'm going to give you guys an example from my life that really sort of demonstrates some of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about in the question of how to mix in a society so fascinated with diversity. Highlights along the way include an impression that I do as part of my stand-up act that really just sort of happened accidentally. We're also going to do a little ASMR for you tingling fanatics. Got a topless scene, if you can imagine that. All kinds of interesting things happening right around the corner. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the episode. We are Off Topic. People of Earth, welcome. I am Matthew East, and we are Off Topic, out of uniform, off the fucking grid. I just got back from a run, and I was in the middle of it. I had been trying to get a podcast that I like to listen to play for the first mile, sitting there staring at my phone, tapping it, trying to get it. It wouldn't play, and I found myself having to run in silence. As I was running, I started thinking, and then I remembered that I used to run in silence all the time. I used to never bring earbuds. And I would have some of my most amazing thoughts in the middle of that exhaustion, that tiredness. It was kind of my therapy back just a few years ago, really. I was doing it that way. I don't remember why I stopped, but I found myself running in silence today, and out of the sky dropped Off Topic Subject 3. And I'm going to tell you what birthed the thought. I was thinking about a poker game that I host once a month with a bunch of friends of mine. And I was thinking about the people who were coming next week to the game. And one of the guys has this thing where he has been trying for months and months to get me to host a poker game out in the woods on a hiking trail. Not too far from the cars. He's not looking to do big hikes, but my buddy is a guy who has been on some hikes with me. I don't think I've mentioned on this podcast that I used to lead hikes. I used to lead groups of guys on 3 and 4 day, usually 4 day hikes into the woods. We'd get away from our cell phones. We'd get away from, what shall I call it, the chitter chatter of our daily lives. That was amazingly overly ambiguous and not ambiguous enough. He's talking about the fucking women in our homes, and just let guys be guys. And it's ridiculous therapy. Poker is another one of my passions. And like I said, I host a game, I deal a game, and we come together, and it's a lot of fun once a month. But my buddy that wants me to host this poker game out on the hiking trail is really, really enthusiastic about it, and I think it's a horrible idea. I think the idea of playing poker in the woods is fun because playing poker is fun and being in the woods is fun, but those things don't particularly mix. Forget the setup, forget the chips and the cards and some kind of table and whatever else you might do. But just thinking in terms of poker is supposed to be played on felt. It is supposed to be played in dim light. Typically, there's a drunk guy somewhere at the table that everybody's preying on. It's got a vibe to it that is its own thing. And the woods hiking trails have the Woods has a vibe to it as well that is equally awesome, but very, very different. And I like these two activities, hiking and poker, for two very, very, very different reasons, or I should say a spectrum of very, very different reasons. I don't think they mix. And it got me thinking of all the things in the world, including our fellow Earthlings, the discovery of which results in that unpleasant experience known as ghosting. I mean, the breakup. That are good in and of themselves, but that don't mix. And so there's things that do mix and things that don't mix, and we're going to talk about all of that today and get into and try to figure out what it means. As you can see, this idea is brand new. I'm sitting here in my running shorts and tennis shoes. As far as you know. So suck it up for me being out of uniform. I'm sure I'll be back in uniform for the majority of this episode, but I wanted to record this because my wheels started turning about all these different things that do mix and don't mix. You guys remember Reese's Peanut Butter Cup commercials, the ad chain that talked about different people proposing different things that they thought would mix better than peanut butter and chocolate, and ultimately the peanut butter and chocolate wins out. As some chef in some castle proposing, chocolate and snails. I remember being one of the more absurd ones. Oldish, yes. Senile, no. Check this out.
In 1701, an obscure chef wanted to impress his king.
Let's see, chocolate and peanut butter or chocolate and snails?
Chocolate and peanut butter.
What? I am the chef. You are the king. Chocolate and snails.
He just missed discovering the great taste of pure milk chocolate and delicious peanut butter. Not to mention impressing the king. And so the world would have to wait for the two great tastes that taste great together in Reese's Peanut Butter Cups.
But it's just all these different combinations of things that don't mix. And then miraculously, two things like peanut butter and chocolate, which are both delicious on their own, come together and form, in my humble opinion, the most magnificent candy on the face of the planet. So chocolate and peanut butter do, but many things don't. I was thinking about drinks. You know how on a hot summer day you might enjoy sipping a gin and tonic, two things that, in my opinion, don't even taste good on their own, but miraculously you mix them together and they blend perfectly. Who decides all of these wonderful things that come together and mix? My favorite drink of all, I'm not currently drinking, but I really, really loved Maker's Mark and Sprite. Now, why that combination? Because when I was a younger man, I was into rum and Coke. And a buddy of mine, Scott Jackson, if you're out there, love you, miss you, hope you're doing well. But a hearty shout out to Moose and RJ as well, without whom we wouldn't have been able to create the Four Horsemen of the Aleutians, the group responsible for many of the brain cells I lost back then, and without which I am functioning in today's world at a very interesting level. Came up to me one day and said, "Matt, you got to try this." And he handed me a drink, and I said, "What is it?" He said, "Just sip it." And I sipped it, and it was amazing. And it was something in cola, and I said, "What is it?" He said, "It's Maker's Mark. It's a bourbon whiskey, and it's Maker's and Coke." And I said, "This is my new drink." Well, I got to a point where I loved the Maker's Mark so much that the cola was obscuring the taste just a little bit, and I decided to try it with Sprite, and it became my most beloved drink. Maker's and 7 is what you order, but Maker's and Sprite, whatever they have, and I have been drinking Maker's Mark with a splash of Sprite for 25 years. But I wouldn't drink Maker's and tonic, I wouldn't put something in it that doesn't belong, because certain things mix and certain things don't. What's interesting about people who like good bourbon is that most people say it's sacrilege to put anything in it. Even rocks, is considered a crutch, if you will. You're supposed to just, how many fingers do you want? You drink it neat, you sip it. And what's interesting about me is I became a bourbon connoisseur because I really became passionate about Maker's Mark, and I will really, really enjoy the variety of many, many other bourbons, neat or on the rocks, and that is the way that I prefer to drink everything except Maker's Mark. Why? Because I was introduced to Maker's Mark with a mixer, and even though I can recognize that it is delicious on its own, my history, my story, causes me to blend those two things, and that makes it work for me. So there's a thought that something that blends well for one person may or may not blend well, for somebody else based on our history, our background, the textures of our lives. Quick cut in here, Earthlings. We're going to kill two birds with one stone right now. The reason right now is because of the first bird. The first bird is to make the point that even though I like Makers and Sprite because of my background and my history with that particular combination, I do not force or ask or expect anybody else to drink their Maker's Mark mixed exactly that way, the way that it works for me. So you can take that any one of 1,000 ways from any one of 1,000 different angles. I just thought it deserved to be said at this point. The second reason for the cut-in is to introduce you to my new studio. We have relocated. It has caused a little bit of delay in production of this episode. I apologize for that. But we got new digs, we got new lighting, we got new background. Everything is set up just a little bit better. It's a little bit more convenient for me because it's in my home. And I'm looking forward to continuing to broadcast from this location. Those 2 points covered and those 2 birds dead as a doornail, I return you now to your regularly scheduled podcast. And thankfully, the part where we continue broadcasting to you with clothes on. Very good morning to you, Earthlings. We are just a few heartbeats away from, if you follow me on TikTok, one of my thoughts during morning coffee. At Matthew East Laughs is the handle if you're behind the times and haven't followed me yet. And if you can't spell any of that, retake the 3rd grade. As you can see, I have gotten myself vertical. But today is a brainstorming and creating day for me. And the thought that I had was, let's talk about things that may or may not mix by mixing things and seeing what happens. We haven't done any prep for this. And I'm sitting here at breakfast thinking about whether or not this might mix with this episode. Even though normally these two things wouldn't mix, it might be a perfect mix for this episode on mixing. Let's talk about food mix for a second. I like to add protein to my ridiculously carby, unhealthy breakfast by taking a little bit of peanut butter and mixing it in with my bite of cereal. ASMR lovers, prepare to tingle. These are Honey Nut Chex or Honey something Chex. Chex' version of trying to mimic the old Honey Nut Cheerio. There's a mix that General Mills came up with a couple decades ago. Made a lot of money on that. That's my Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump is one of the most unique impressions for guys because of its singularity and its ease. If you have a semi-deep voice and you want to mimic Forrest Gump, all you have to do is come up with a half-baked thought, like I just did, tie it to the movie, like I just did, and then close your nose. And I'm Forrest Gump.
Show off. Hey, did you guys know that Sean Connery showed up to Wimbledon just slightly before tennis? Now that was fucking good-ish.
But back to the mixing, there's another example of that I'm going to bring up today because it was something that I had to consider for today. A couple of other really good things. Again, recording this podcast, spending time creatively here, and an equally rewarding, redeeming, valuable activity of going running shopping with my son. My son is training for a fitness test that he needs to be able to pass next spring to enter a Special Forces track in the United States Air Force. He's really excited about it, and today was going to be the day. And when I realized that today was also a day when I don't have a scheduled workout, I don't have any meetings or, Zooms or anything on my calendar either. Typically days like that, I like to get up, move slowly, get my creative juices flowing, and then see what happens with the podcast. And the positive podcast, recording activity and the activity of finding a couple hours probably in this afternoon to take my son shoe shopping don't particularly mix.
Like to hazard a guess about that afternoon's activities? Hint, hint, cost me $160, and this was recorded later.
Mixing is a part of life, and keeping things that don't belong together apart is a completely different part of life. And so with that, as I sit here eating my breakfast and creating this podcast,
ASMR lovers, congratulations. Today is your day. If, however, you suffer from misophonia, as I discovered in researching ASMR, then I've probably already pissed you off. Just FYI, it's about to get a lot fucking worse.
forgot the peanut butter. But as I sit here doing this, you can understand also that some things that mix well sometimes might not mix well other times. We are literally executing a visual metaphor.
But isn't it the audio metaphor that we'll all really remember? General rule I try to live by: try not to have onias.
Right now. Which I think is going to make this a pretty good fit in the episode on mixing. Might not be such a great fit next time we're discussing something more philosophical.
Please submit all death threats in writing to eastofftopic@gmail.com.
Processing times vary and are not guaranteed by Off Topic. But we're going to get kind of all over the map with some of these topics, and you may start listening to something at some point that you've never thought of before or that you don't find particularly interesting. But if my production style,
Pretty sure he's talking about me.
is something that you enjoy, you might learn something new just by hanging with us. Another time, we're going to hit something that you're like, oh my God, this is like my hobby. It's my passion. And it's going to mix perfectly with what you're looking for. I hope that they're all valuable, though. As we continue my breakfast eating here, recording, we're going to go with the vitamins. I hope that you can see the uniqueness in what we're trying to do here and the diversity that Off Topic is really built for. So with that, I'm going to hit pause on the record, finish my breakfast, and we'll come back at you from another place and time.
Earthlings, I am out here doing a little bit of diverse podcast filming. Really what I'm doing is not that at all. I'm walking the dog. Milo and I are getting his exercise. Say hi to Milo. Milo, say hi. And we're beating the storms. It's going to be a lovely night of thunder and lightning and all kinds of stuff. I don't know if you can see the sky behind me. It's starting to get that way. But we're almost back and going to enjoy that from the indoors, because one thing that doesn't mix is walking the dog and a lot of rain. But while I want to keep this episode pretty superficial, pretty light, I was musing on a deeper topic, and I thought I would record it this way, because even though this might not be a great way to produce a video podcast, it might mix a little awkwardly with everything else, because the subject of the episode is, do they mix? That, in its own creative way, makes it appropriate, even if it sucks. So we'll see if it sucks. I don't really know. Musing is this, though. Here's as deep as we're going to dig, deep as we're going to dive into the topic of do they mix? And that is on a societal level, with all the diversity that we're celebrating and all the mixing that we're asking the world to do. Is there a line between diversity and absurdity? And if so, where is it? The question every individual needs to ask themselves is, what am I contributing? You have the privilege, Earthlings, of living in a pretty freaking advanced society. In all of history, we are some of the most privileged human beings to ever live. And that society was created by a lot of creativity, energy, people with motors, people with ideas. It grew and it was developed, and the fact that we get to live in it is not our just birthright. It's something that we have an obligation to give to as well. So you got to ask yourself, am I contributing? Because if you're not, you fall into the category that I call takers. And if you're a taker, society is either going to survive by removing you as necessary, or the society is going to die because you are going to take and take until it shrivels up and withers away. So ask yourself that question. Now, on the positive side of complementary contributions, let's just go back to the Reese's peanut butter cup. Peanut butter and chocolate. Both things give something to the product. They complement each other. They enhance each other. They make each other better. That's the model we're looking for.
Now, if you, within the society that creates peanut butter cups, wants to be like, I don't know, a marble, then you are going to exist within this creation machine, and you are either going to do damage to the machine, or you are going to create a really, really shitty piece of candy. Okay, because you're not complementing anything. You can be perfectly spherical and really shiny and really beautiful.
Pop quiz. Who remembers the things that are great on their own but don't mix well together? Tick tock, tick, 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 tick. Poker and hiking. If you got that right, nothing happens.
Doesn't matter. The peanut butter and the chocolate don't give a shit. So I guess my message to you and the world is, within the world around you, don't be a fucking marble. And that doesn't mean, peanut butter and chocolate's simple. That doesn't mean there's only 2 ingredients. There's a lot of diverse ways to contribute. Just don't be the thing that does nothing but detracts for the sake of itself. My example of that is the furries. If you exist only to be noticed, or to confound the world around you, or to get a reaction, probably a negative one in a lot of situations, from the world around you, that is not only extremely narcissistic, but it is destructive. And I'm not saying a normally productive member of society can't have a hobby. I'm sure there are some of you that fall into that category. And if that floats your boat and you're giving in other ways at other times, I'm going to say, have at it.
Still fucking weird.
But there's a lot of people in the world that are just kind of living the life of a furry. And that's where you're doing more harm than good. We're home, so I'm going to cut this short and we're going to see if it fits in anywhere.
You know what's a whole hell of a lot easier to produce than a super organized, super fluid, super integrated, super smooth podcast? A podcast about mixing where you don't give a shit about mixing.
So I said we were going to keep this pretty light, other than the whole social questions that we're maybe asking ourselves about what are we contributing. But I thought of another good do they mix example, and I wanted to bring it up because I experienced it. And what I want to demonstrate with this example is that to accomplish a goal, to unify toward a purpose, which is really what humanity is built to do. It's what we're designed to do as interacting, living, breathing human beings. There has to be a sacrifice of individuality. And celebrating the differences when it's more important to consider the ability to contribute is harmful. There is no greater example of this than the United States military. When I arrived at the United States Air Force Academy, on the first day of in-processing, one of the very first stops was the barber. And they took my hair, which at the time was a modest mid-90s mullet, and they removed it right down to less than a quarter inch on the rest of my head. And my only consolation was that it was happening to every motherfucker around me at exactly the same pace in exactly the same way. Now, why do they do that? Why do they take that individuality away from you? The reason is because you have to learn what it means to be a member of a team, to be one piece of a larger group that is no more important, no more special than any other piece. You get that individuality back after you learn to function in a group, after you learn to contribute, after you learn to pull your weight. And that's how you mix. You mix first by blending in, by contributing, by cooperating. Then, when you're mixed, when you're already a well-oiled machine, you get to bring out some of that individuality. You get to express some of your uniqueness. But to become a functioning member, you've got to get yourself down on the same level as everybody else, and you've got to accept the fact that standing out is not what you want, and it's not what they want from you. Earthlings, if the United States military is smart enough to know that this is an extremely effective way to bring people together, to unify people, by taking away their individuality and then giving it back when they've earned it with contribution, maybe we can learn something from that one as a society. Learn to mix. Learn to give up that individuality, and your opportunities to express it will eventually be multiplied by the beautiful environment in which you exist. Stick with me, Earthlings. We've got so much ahead of us. Listen to 5 episodes and let me demonstrate to you the diversity and the energy that we're going to bring to you coming up in the Off Topic Podcast. You can also email us with your own ideas or call us. The email address is eastofftopic@gmail.com. The phone number 864-432-3379. Replay it if you need it, but call us or email us and stick with us by subscribing right now. We'll see you next time.